It is the 31st of March 2014, the first day of what was to become the longest jury hearing in British legal history.
It's got to be the truth. We need to get justice for our loved ones so they can rest.
He had a future, he had a family, he had friends, he had everything going for him.
You're going to have to be prepared for some dreadful things that are going to come out.
I believe it was their inquest, the police, the last one in 91, and this one is for the 96.
In a converted office block on an industrial estate in Warrington, families bereaved by the disaster were the first to be called to new inquests. They took the jury back to the day of the tragedy.
It was a lovely sunny day. I was up early, so I'd actually gone to wake him up to see what time he wanted to go, but he didn't need to be up that early. So I let him go back to sleep, and I headed off to Manchester about 8 o'clock in the morning.
Sue Roberts' older brother Graham had arranged to travel to the Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield with a group of mates. His beloved Liverpool FC had reached the semi-final of the FA Cup for the second year running.
I didn't know anything was wrong until 5 o'clock as I was leaving to come home, and my friend was driving, and the radio was on and she was going to play a cassette, and I just said, no, can we leave the radio on, because Graham was there.
I can only assume that there was overcrowding, and as they tried to come out from behind the barriers, people at the front were crushed.
Another Liverpool fan, Tony Barnbrock, was all too aware of what was going on at the Hillsborough Stadium. He was in the same area as Graham Roberts, the central pens of the Leppings Lane terrace.
Couldn't move, you just couldn't get anywhere. Just like in a matter of seconds, you went from, well, squeezing through people like the way we used to at the match, to just bang. You couldn't go up, forwards, sideways, backwards anyway. You just had to get tighter and tighter and tighter. I was up in the air, I was facing away from the pitch.
To understand why such crushing had occurred, you have to look at events earlier in the afternoon. A carnival atmosphere had started to turn tense as turnstiles struggled to process the large crowds gathering at Leppings Lane. In an effort to ease the flow, an exterior gate was opened. Similar action had been taken in previous years, but this time no effort was made by the police to seal the central tunnel leading to already overcrowded pens. At 3:15, in this police control box, match commander David Duckenfield told the chief executive of the Football Association that fans had gained entry. He didn't say that the gate was opened on his instructions. Many rank-and-file officers, meanwhile, were dealing with the dead and dying. One of those officers was Special Constable Deborah Martin.
There was no coordination. This time they packed them to overcapacity, and that's when I could hear the screaming. That's when I realised that because they'd been packed in like sardines, it was a domino effect. And that's when I saw people literally squashed up against the fencing.
The terror within the central pens at Leppings Lane intensified as Tony Barnbrock started hearing bones breaking, including his own.
There was a lad with his arm around, and with the crush of people trying to, because there was like 3 people trying to get out of a gate for one. It was like every man for themselves, which, you know, you would be. And his arm just cracked and smashed me, and he broke my sternum and a couple of ribs as he'd done it. His arm was round the barrier and it just snapped into my arm. Then I managed to get him out by his hair. I pulled him out.
I went and turned the telly on. It was chaos, and the emergency number was popping up on the television screen, and so we started phoning Friends and family were phoning us to see if we'd heard any news.
At the stadium, a temporary mortuary had been set up in the gym. Deborah Martin found herself in the midst of the most harrowing scenes.
It was just a mess in the gym. There was no organisation at all. As he came, we were just putting people down. They're trying to do some sort of segregation, but at the end of it, it was just a mess.
One of the victims was 15-year-old Kevin Williams, identified here in a clip shown to the inquest's jury. His case was to become crucial in eventually undermining the verdict of accidental death at the original inquest.
I noticed that he was going blue around the lips, so I had to do CPR, and I did the chest compressions, but he was deteriorating at the time. I remember trying it twice more, and that's when I realised that Kevin was dying, and I just remember this little boy was laid in my arms and he just looked straight at me. His eyes actually opened and he looked straight at me, and his last words was "Mum."
Kevin Williams, aged 15, had become one of the 96, as had Graham Roberts.
We were taken into a room and there was a glass screen the length of one of the walls. On the other side of the glass screen there was curtains and there was stupid pipe music playing, and then they asked were we ready, and the curtains were drawn back, and sadly there was Graham lying on them. It's obviously still the worst moment of my life. You don't expect to see your big brother. He'd only gone to a football match.
Lurid and inaccurate stories followed, quoting police sources. It fuelled the toxic atmosphere, and families believed that when it came to dealing with officialdom, they paid a devastating price.
When it was explained who we were told to sit in the corner, and we was just sat down in a corner of this police station, as my dad used to describe it, with the Saturday night drunks. We'd never been treated like decent human beings. You'd think we were hooligans, you'd think we were thugs. You wouldn't have thought we were bereaved family members.
As far as families were concerned, a verdict of accidental death at the original inquest added insult to injury. They became increasingly concerned at the coroner's decision not to accept evidence from after 3:15 on the day of the disaster. He'd concluded that by then all of those who died had suffered irreversible injuries. Deborah Martin believes that her statement saying a dying boy had spoken to her half an hour after that point had become inconvenient. She told the inquests that she was visited by an investigating officer.
Basically, she said that the statement that I'd made didn't hold true. There was a lot of faults in it, and the only way to rectify it was by having a new statement. And as I said to her at the time, I stand by my original statement. I'm not doing it. I want you to go. And that's when the badgering started. That's when I found out what another police officer could do to another police officer, and it was horrible. It was name calling. I wasn't very good at my job. I didn't know what I was doing. I was very mixed up. I wasn't aware of what had occurred at Hillsborough.
Nevertheless, you signed that statement.
I had to sign it, yeah. I signed it under duress. I didn't want to do it, but if that was the only way of getting rid of this woman, who was basically calling me a liar, and that I just actually fabricated everything, she broke me.
Former West Midlands Sergeant Julie Appleton strongly rejected the accusations, saying she had every sympathy for the experience Deborah Martin had been through, and she denied bullying her. On her behalf, the Police Federation said she's given live evidence to the inquests, she's provided 2 written statements to the Independent Police Complaints Commission and Operation Resolve, and won't be making any further comment. But Deborah Martin is not the only former South Yorkshire officer to have criticised police handling of the Hillsborough disaster and its aftermath. Inspector Clive Davis told the new inquests that his bosses were determined, virtually from the outset, that fans would take the blame.
And the story emerges that one of the outside gates leading into that terrace was broken. People without tickets got in, were therefore overcrowding the people with tickets, and that's why the crush occurred.
Even as people lay dying at Hillsborough, the claims blaming fans had started to spread rapidly and began to take hold. Metropolitan Police Officer Keith Leahy attended the recent Hillsborough memorial service at Liverpool. He knows better than most why football supporters went straight into already overcrowded pens 27 years earlier. He was among them, and like hundreds of others, couldn't see an alternative route.
I went through the gate that was opened and just went down that tunnel. The only thing you saw when you walked in through the gate was just the tunnel opened, so just walked in. Felt like just a normal game until we got inside, and it was all. And I could tell then it was too many people there, and it just weren't right. And then it was just unbearable. That's all you can. I very nearly never came home. This is for all those people that didn't. I was that far away. I was in the middle of it all in the Leppings Lane. So I've come here every year since, because it could have been me.
And obviously this is an extremely emotional occasion for you.
Very much so, yeah.
As grief-stricken fans and families mourned in Hillsborough's immediate aftermath, pressure was already mounting to quickly establish the cause. At the Sheffield Stadium on the day after the event, the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, was briefed by a team which included the match commander, David Duckenfield.
I felt we had to come first to get a much better impression of what the problem was.
South Yorkshire Police knew well that their actions would come under intense scrutiny. It was vital that they got their story right, and the Police Federation made it clear what that story was.
The vast majority of that lot had been drinking, the ones that were arriving late, and they will not be told where to go. They won't do anything you try to do. And what can you do?
Clive Davis is one of just a few former officers to speak out about Hillsborough. He claims that 2 days after the disaster, one of his bosses, the then Chief Inspector Norman Bettison, invited him to a meeting at Force headquarters.
He thought it would be beneficial to us from a career point of view if we both went to that meeting. I didn't read anything into that particularly, because clearly this was going to be big. This was going to be the biggest thing ever to affect an impact on this organisation.
Chief Superintendent Terry Wayne allegedly led the meeting.
He began to speak about the fact that the organisation was he'd been asked by the Chief Constable to get a team together, to put a team together to prepare a police response to what had actually happened on the Saturday. Some of the words still ring in my ears now, that basically we were going to put the blame for this disaster where it belonged on drunken, ticketless Liverpool supporters.
The now retired Chief Superintendent Terry Wayne turned down our request for an interview, but he told the inquests he was not involved in the Hillsborough investigation at the relevant time. The former Chief Inspector and subsequently knighted Sir Norman Bettison also rejected our interview request. He was asked at the inquests if his work had involved an attempt to blame Liverpool fans. He said, "Let me be clear, I am not embarrassed by the issue. I was not part of some black propaganda unit to put the blame on the fans." John Horrocks was just a child when his father Arthur died.
More the survivors were blamed, and they were said they were pickpocketing and they were doing other stuff and doing this. No tickets, there was too many, they were all drunk. And it's just not true, is it?
Like his father before him, John Horrocks became an ardent Liverpool football supporter.
If we go to the game, I think, because my mum scattered his ashes at Anfield in the goal, Cop End, he's sort of there, but he could have been there with me, sitting next to me, standing next to me, watching the game with me.
In the years that followed the disaster, it emerged that officers had been discouraged from criticising senior colleagues. According to one report, 164 statements from officers were picked out for amendment. Of those, 116 were changed to remove unfavourable comments about South Yorkshire Police. The word chaotic, for example, was taken out. Despite that, a Labour government decided in the late 1990s to draw a line under Hillsborough. Andy Burnham was an aspiring, though as yet unelected MP.
I remember the day that happened. I pulled over in my car. I was out in the middle of, I think I was in Sheffield, in fact, on that day. And I remember weeping in the lay-by, just thinking, wow, because that promise to reopen Hillsborough was a huge reason for enthusiasm in 1997. And when that happened, I just thought, how can that be right?
He could not have known then that more than 10 years later, as Culture Secretary, he would stand before Liverpool fans at Anfield in an event to mark the 20th anniversary of the Hillsborough disaster.
Today I represent the Prime Minister and the government. 20 years ago...
Nor could he have known that he would face head-on the frustration of football fans and families who had lost faith in politicians, the justice system and the establishment. In response, Andy Burnham helped establish complete transparency with disclosure of all the documents and footage. The government waived secrecy rules, and the result was the Hillsborough Independent Panel report. It concluded that a less chaotic emergency response may well have saved lives. And from the mass of evidence, nothing, other than a few isolated examples of drunkenness and violence from Liverpool supporters. The Prime Minister's response was clear.
So on behalf of the government, and indeed our country, I am profoundly sorry that this double injustice has been left uncorrected for so long.
The original verdict of accidental death was subsequently quashed. The police finally held up their hands and released this unequivocal statement. On that day, South Yorkshire Police failed victims and families. The police lost control. In the immediate aftermath, senior officers sought to change the record of events. Disgraceful lies were told, which blamed Liverpool fans for the disaster. Families believed that justice was getting closer. At the new inquests, Hillsborough match commander David Duckenfield accepted for the first time that he had not told the truth about the cause of the disaster, and he apologised to families. Some were overwhelmed.
You're just mixed with emotions, because you've got to start thinking of the people who have gone, who wanted to hear them words and not heard them words. They died tormented.
But when we visited David Duckenfield's home, he was not keen to expand on why he had waited so long to put the record straight.
I've cooperated with you.
Some of his former colleagues took a less apologetic approach at the inquests. Despite the earlier statement from South Yorkshire Police, they repeated allegations of drunkenness and bad behaviour by fans. The story of Hillsborough had come full circle.
The fact that they've rerun these old slurs has led this inquest to go on much longer than it should have done, and that has caused great pain to the families. I know that, and that's wrong. It's also led to tens of millions of pounds of public money being spent on lawyers, and that is also wrong.
Everything is being done by people here to...
Not one scrap of evidence, not one piece of video or photographic evidence has been produced in this inquest that backs up the police case. And to have police officers still rerunning those old slurs is quite frankly sickening.
Though the future may bring important changes, nothing can repair the damage of the past and the painful 27 years of waiting for justice.
You always say it'll deduce 96. It's in the hundreds because people have committed suicide because of it. People have got ill worrying because of it. It's just half the past 27 years. It's still bad. I still have a couple of nightmares about it. I still think about it. Sleepless nights, sitting there in the world of your own and you relive it again.
It's been a cover-up. They've covered things up. Instead of being truthful, instead of being honest, as they portrayed the job to me at the beginning when I first became a special constable. If they'd done that, then we wouldn't be here today having to deal with Hillsborough again.
I was 23 at the time. I'm 50 now. It's as though all my adult life I've lived fighting this battle. Graham was a decent human being. We shouldn't still be here doing this. So many family members have passed away, died tormented like both my parents. This truth should have just been allowed to come out back then in 1989.
We're absolutely delighted, my wife and I, that we can look back and say that we've done everything we can for our son and his memory.
The jury got it right this time. I feel as if this jury has took everything in that was getting said in the courts over these past 2 years. It hasn't been easy for them, obviously, but I think they remembered it's not easy for the families who were sitting there. I was crying. I was absolutely crying, but also praying at the same time. I just prayed to James and the other 95. Please God, son, I want you to sleep well for the first time. I want you to rest in peace now without seeing your mum's anger.
This should have been the inquest that we had 27 years ago. It's over. The truth has won, as far as I'm concerned, at long last. This fight that we've had on our hands, now the whole world believes what we were trying to tell them 27 years ago.